Welcome to the podcast summary of Iron Man 3. Iron Man 3 is a superhero sequel that's a lot more interested in anxiety, image making, and political theater than in simply building a bigger suit. It strips Tony Stark down, turns its terrorist villain into a performance, and keeps asking what heroism looks like when the branding, the machinery, and the mythology all start to wobble. It's also one of those big franchise movies that split people pretty hard while making an absurd amount of money. So, the interesting part isn't whether it was loved or hated. It's why this particular swing still feels worth talking about. The core of the movie is Tony Stark coming apart after the invasion of New York. He's got panic attacks, insomnia, nightmares, hypervigilance, and this compulsive need to keep building more and more suits. Like if he can just engineer enough protection, maybe his brain will calm down. What makes that stand out is the movie treats this as actual trauma, not just superhero moodiness. Psychologists pointed out that his symptoms line up pretty closely with post-traumatic stress disorder, and the film lets that land instead of brushing past it. So when Tony says the big wormhole in the sky changed him, the movie believes him. That's really the crisis here. The problem isn't a lack of better tech. It's a guy who saw something enormous and came back unable to feel safe in his own life. Shane Black's smartest move is forcing Tony out of his usual ecosystem. His Malibu home gets destroyed, his lab is gone, his money and Avengers Network don't solve the problem. And for a while, he's basically a sleep-deprived genius in the middle of Tennessee trying to make things work. That's where the movie quietly makes its case that Iron Man isn't just a suit. Tony improvises, investigates, rigs gadgets out of scraps, and keeps moving because invention is the thing he actually is. The ending spells it out. He removes the shrapnel, blows up the armors, and says that even without all of it, he'll always be Iron Man. His resolution isn't another upgrade, it's letting go of dependence. Then there's the Mandarin twist, which is still probably the movie's most argued over choice. The fearsome terrorist turns out to be Trevor Slattery, an oblivious British actor hired to play the part. That reveal turns the villain into a media construction. The beard, the broadcasts, the military styling, the foreign imagery, all of that is the weapon. The performance creates the fear before anybody checks whether the story actually makes sense. And that's where the movie gets sharper than people sometimes give it credit for. Killian uses the fake Mandarin to explain away extremist disasters as terrorism, while AIM profits from a permanent war narrative. The public gets a familiar enemy to stare at, and the real power grab happens somewhere else. It's also a critique of how easy it is to accept the most available visual script. If the image looks like a Middle Eastern terrorist we've been trained to recognize, people stop asking questions. The movie absolutely pokes at xenophobia there. The backlash made sense too, especially for comic fans, because this was a radical rewrite of the Mandarin character. And later, All Hail the King had to come in and say, basically, okay, there is a real Mandarin out there in the MCU. Everybody take a breath. Iron Man 3 also pushes the series' military-industrial critique into very specific post-9/11 territory. Killian's plan is to control a threat, profit from the fear around it, publicly assassinate the president, and install a puppet government that keeps the machine running. What makes that scheme especially ugly is the extremist sales pitch. It's presented as a regenerative cure for wounded veterans, which gives it this morally persuasive sheen. But when people's bodies violently reject it, those failures get reframed as terrorist bombings. That's the movie saying, sacrifice can be exploited just as easily as it can be honored. Real pain becomes raw material for institutions chasing money and leverage. And sitting right in the middle of that is the Iron Patriot armor. Rhodey's still Rhodey, but the suit is national branding in bright red, white, and blue. The government wants a hero it can package, control, and point at cameras, which is a pretty clean contrast with Tony's more chaotic individualism. For long stretches, this movie is less a giant armor showdown and more a character-driven techno-thriller with a Christmas backdrop. That seasonal setting gives everything this shared emotional weather. People are isolated, lonely, trying to reconnect, trying not to sit alone with their worst thoughts. The Tennessee section is where that really clicks. Tony in a kid's garage, doing detective work and building improvised tools, is a very different texture from Avenger-scale spectacle. And it's a fun one. Harley Keener matters there too. He's this lonely child who kind of functions like a ghost from Tony's own past, nudging him back toward empathy and responsibility. The movie sneaks in a buddy comedy rhythm and even a father-son dynamic without losing the larger plot. Then the finale swings back to the giant stuff. Remote-controlled suits, the Air Force One rescue, the collapsing oil tanker. But that contrast is the point. The technology is useful, spectacular, sometimes very cool, but it isn't the source of Tony's heroism. Pepper Potts gets one of the more interesting arcs in the film, because it keeps asking whether she's just the endangered partner or whether she might actually become the rescuer. By the end, after surviving extremists, she uses that power to kill Killian and save Tony. So in the most basic plot sense, Pepper is the decisive agent in defeating the villain. The movie really does hand her the finishing move. But it also pulls back from the implications pretty quickly. Her transformation is temporary. She gets stabilized, and the story settles back into a safer normal. And behind the scenes, the gender politics get even messier. Rebecca Hall said Maya Hansen was originally meant to be a more substantial and morally complex antagonist. But Marvel executives reportedly shifted the main villain role to Killian, because they were worried a female villain would hurt merchandising. Other major female roles were reportedly reduced too. So the movie reaches for something more subversive with its women characters, then stops short in a way that feels very familiar for studio superhero filmmaking. Reception was mixed in an interesting way. Critics generally liked the humor, the action, and Robert Downey Jr.'s performance. Rotten Tomatoes had it at 79% from 327 reviews, while Metacritic gave it a 62 out of 100. That spread kind of matches the conversation around the movie. Some people saw a refreshing reinvention with actual personality, and others thought the final act slipped back into formula and lost some emotional force. None of that hurt the box office. It made about $1.266 billion worldwide on a reported $200 million budget, opened domestically to $174.1 million, which at the time was the second biggest opening ever behind The Avengers, and it became the first Iron Man movie to clear $1 billion. That's part of what makes it such a useful franchise case study. A movie can make a genuinely controversial creative choice, annoy a big chunk of the audience, and still come out as the biggest hit in its own series. What lasts with Iron Man 3 is that it treats Tony Stark's identity as something more fragile and more human than the machinery around him. Under all the fireworks, it's a movie about trauma, performance, and the difference between a hero and a brand. And for a blockbuster full of exploding metal suits, that's a pretty grounded thing to hang on to. This episode was generated by Podkey. Create your own at podkey.fm.